Hello world, my name is R the Silent, and today's video is going to be about fairies. Yeah, so here we go. So, the earliest instance or known history of fairies I think dates back to about 600 BC. Now, they're typically referred to as fae, which translates to fate, and I believe fairy translates to enchanted. So, where do they come from? I have no idea. But what I do know, and upon all the research that I've done today, I know that they show up in every single culture across the world. They appear everywhere over the planet over the course of thousands of years. They're included in Celtic, even in religions too. So, like, except for Christianity, and probably some under the umbrella that is Christianity, like Protestant, and anything that really relates to the Bible, probably not. But they're integrated into the Celtic culture, the Egyptian culture, shamanic culture, so Native Americans. Just a variation of like just different belief systems. They all have their own depictions and historical stories that relate specifically to fairies, the existence of fairies. Hello. So back in the day, way back in the day, the Earth wasn't as spiritually dense, and the veil that separates our world from the other world, I suppose, is very thin, or was very thin. And I believe with the Industrial Revolution and the production of like electricity and creating roads and technology that we have now, it's definitely so the stories stated that it pushed the Fae into the forest where they hid in caves under trees and stuff like that. And then eventually they just like moved specifically into the spiritual realm. So yeah. And speaking of the spiritual realm, so there's as I've talked about in other videos, there's the fourth dimension, which is just above the third, which is where um, most of mankind or female kind or human beings level of perception is on the third dimensional level, and anything fourth and above is a lot of times out of our perceptual understanding. So they could reside anywhere between the fourth dimension or higher. But a lot of the stuff that I've read actually depicts fairyland as kind of a astral place. Like it exists beyond the concept of time, or it has a different concept of time. It's like it stands still. The people there have been described as uh, eternally beautiful, and a lot of stories seem to relate fairyland to the land of the dead because that's where a lot of ghosts seem to be as well. And spiritually speaking, um, when we die, our soul goes into the fourth dimension astrally to get rid of a lot of the like karmic issues that we've had in this life, all the emotional turmoil that we may have suffered in this life. And so we kind of go to the astral realm to kind of like uh, shred, like snakes, molt. Yeah, so we'll use that word. So to kind of like molt off a lot of that emotional excess, so we're light enough to go higher into the other dimension of what people perceive as heaven. But the fairy realm also is considered many to be or has been depicted as the place of pagan heaven. Now, I'm not entirely sure about that, but I do know that in this, from what I've read, that this world of fairies, of the fae kind, is ruled by immortals who don't seem to age, and they have the ability to alter someone's, or let's just say, to enchant others into perhaps walking over that veil. So there's been a lot of stories, a lot of stories throughout history, and a lot of them actually. So they're kind of strange. Fairies tend to steal babies. They steal the babies, and they like to steal humans of beautiful nature, whether they're children or not. But babies, um, new mothers for their breast milk, and then as well as men. So there's some stories where the fairies, and of course there are of different like sizes and stature. So some are tiny, some are like pixies, some are there's even water elemental fairies, and there's fire elemental fairies like salamanders and sylphs, mermaids. There's just a whole different range of stuff. So they would typically steal these people because they're beautiful men for lovers. Females, on the practicality basis, and perhaps male fairies were enchanted by them. And babies, usually they would steal babies, and excuse me, in the process of them stealing the babies, what would happen is they would replace their baby with a changeling. Typically, a changeling is a fae that can shapeshift, and it would shapeshift and live out the rest of its days like someone would at a formal facility in the care of a loving mother. It seems that they really admire or love human love, and that's one of the things that tends to get people drawn or like stolen away. Um, and then there's some other stories where some of the old gods and goddesses of like ancient Egypt or the Celtic gods and goddesses, they would it would seem as though the stories imply that the gods and goddesses of old integrated with nature and then became personified. So then they became more human-like in a sense to go about whatever it is that they want. I mean, fairies are very mischievous in nature, and they have been very scornful throughout history. And a lot of history depicts more situations where people should be afraid of them, or not to disrespect them or to care for them. So their music tends to enchant the minds of humans. And when I say that, I mean the typical fairy circles are made of like mushrooms, but lore has it that that used to be a place where fairies and pixies were always excuse me, singing and dancing. There's some stories out there that say you're not supposed to go towards the music because of course they sing and dance, and their joyousness or their jovial laughs will have you stolen away. Another interesting thing. Midsummer's Eve by, I want to say Sherlock Holmes. Y'all know I'm wrong. Shakespeare, right? So Shakespeare, he wrote Midsummer's Eve, right? And that implied that that's the best time to see a fairy. And just to kind of go back again over this, there are several different kinds of fairies. And they're depicted in some stuff, but I wouldn't go heavily off of like movies and such. But like Disney movies like Peter Pan, which depicts, of course, a fairy like uh, man stealing a child, which is the very implication of what fairies used to do, even though that's not the point of the original story. And then there's Spielberg movies, of course, and then Middle Earth, so like Lord of the Rings. It depicted the elf people. They were also kind of, well, of course, we were talking about how fairies would swoon the hearts of men, and not just the minds of men, but the hearts of men as well. So then you have to think, if they're all different shapes and sizes, then there are some that are our stature and some that are taller, some that are tiny, like the pixies. And even gnomes and leprechauns fit into that category. But yeah, the elves in Middle Earth were based upon fairies, or the mixture of fae blood with human blood. Of course, in some of my other videos, I explain what fae blood actually is, which is your witch's blood, another way to say it. Let's see. So the different shapes and sizes, like I was saying, there's faes for every element that that's conceivable. So truly, there's let's see, water, earth, fire, and air. So fire would be like salamanders, air would be the sylphs, mermaids, different types of mermaids would be the water kind. Air, did I say air? Earth would be gnomes, leprechauns, which have been known to give people 3 wishes if you were to actually ever catch one. Now, here's the thing about fairies. We're talking about their world and how it relates to the astral realm, how it's beyond time. And in a lot of these depictions of stories, people who go to fairyland come back and they die because time is different. Time runs differently in fairyland, right? So, and what I mean by that, like, there's this one story about this man whose heart is swooned by a beautiful fairy, and what happens is he goes back to fairyland, right? And he goes to her castle. She's like a queen, and they're there for, I don't know, maybe like a year or something, right? And she tells him, you cannot stand on this like pedestal overlooking your old home, because it sees directly to where your old home is. You're forbidden to see it to it. And he said, well, his action said, I'm gonna go stand because I want to go see how everything's going, and things were falling apart in his hometown. So he begged and begged his wife, his fairy queen, or fairy wife, to go back, and she reluctantly agreed to let him go back. She didn't want him to, but she's like, look, I'm gonna let you go back, but don't get off this horse that I'm gonna get you, right? And the dude was like, yeah, sure, scurries away. What does he do? He gets off the horse the minute he goes through the portal and turns to dust, just gone. And this is why people think that the Fae are personified versions of the gods and goddesses of old. It's because they have such a long lifespan, or are immortal. And here's the thing, so Fae, the Fae kind, we typically can't see them. They are beyond our most humans' level of perception. And when I say that, I mean like they're more than likely on the 4th dimension. Oh, oh, I know, life is terrible. So they're beyond our usual physical perception of the world around us. So they're invisible. They vibrate at such a high frequency that we actually don't see them. And there are some explanations as to people having the sight, meaning like they're clairvoyant, they can actually see them, and actually clairvoyant people are more likely to see these animals. I'm sorry, I'm thinking like to see these to see the fae. So put you down. Okay. Oh, right. Perception, fourth dimension. So they exist on a level higher than what we can usually perceive as human beings. Clairvoyant people, I'm sure clairaudient people should be able to hear them, causing mischief or talking to them if they're around. Clair sentient people should be able to feel them if they're around, and claircognizant people should be able to know that they're just around. Um, and I have videos on what all of those are, and if you fit into one category, you know, it's pretty good. Let's see. So in the Bible, there's not much explanation, or even yeah, there's really not much explanation as to what fairies really are. And I believe there's a reason for that. But just right now, the word fairy only really occurs once. So it states that fairies are unbaptized souls that are too good for hell and too bad for heaven. So they live in the realm just like the middle realm of Earth. So, but it also relates them to the Nephilim. I don't know if there's like a connection to them, probably, but I didn't read anything about it when I was scanning through. But even so, if it was in the Bible, I would love to do videos on unbiased knowledge that I learn about different religions. But for right now, and I also like to get historical facts about certain things, right? So, but in this specific instance, when Christianity moved to Ireland and the powers of authority with the church, they decided that anybody interacting with fairies um, will be accused of witchcraft or Satanism, and we all know how that ends. You know, the witch hunt. You didn't even have to be a witch; you just had to be a female, because the dude who wrote the manual for catching a witch hated women, and he caused the death of probably millions of women and men, but just not as many. He really did not like females. Um, oh yeah, and also children might be more likely to see them and have them as imaginary friends because we're all born with our third eye open. Just another fact I thought I'd throw out there. Um, so they're creatures of love and light, and because they vibrate at such a high frequency, because they are creatures of love and light, that's one of the reasons why we can't actually sense them around. And we did kind of move into their territory, you know, the earth. So the last thing I'm going to say is that some people have uh, visited the fairyland astrally, leaving their body perfectly intact and unharmed from the change of twilight. Uh, yeah. So if you're pretty good doing stuff astrally, or if you need help learning how to astral travel, there's plenty of resources out there. I'll do a video on it. I've only come close to doing it once. It's not something that I like to do. Most people have a mental block in their brain, and it's mostly based on fear. Um, but beyond that, I believe that's probably it about the Fae. Smash that like button, subscribe if you don't mind, if you sat through this unbearable video. It would help me greatly, though, if you did. So, have a good night. Yeah, that's it. That's the one. All right. Bye.